Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time is a review of the 1990 thriller horror film, The Ambulance. Now, this is, in my opinion, one of the most overlooked and underrated thriller horror films of the 1990s. And one of the most overlooked films in Larry Cohen's filmography. This is one of those movies that I personally feel is quite amazing for the most part. And I don't understand why it's been so forgotten about. There are a lot of different elements to this that are very unique. It's a very fast paced, fun, entertaining movie. It's got great performances by the cast. It's got great direction by Larry Cohen, as well as your typical great screenplay by Larry. So it's one of those movies that I'm very thankful that it did get a fairly recent release on Blu-ray by Scream Factory, which I do want to get one of these days. But for right now, I'm okay with the DVD that my good friend Matt Rambaref for Life sent me a while back, because ultimately it's the same transfer that Scream Factory used, and I believe it has the same commentary track. I could be wrong though. I've heard some things that maybe the commentary tracks are different between the German release and the U.S. one. Or I might be getting confused with a different Larry Cohen film, because that's a possibility. But overall, though, this is a film that I'm very pleased with. It's a movie I was curious about for many years because I'm a big fan of Larry Cohen. I remember when I first saw this on VHS, I was very pleasantly surprised by it, and I tried to get more people to give it a watch, to give it a shot, because it's a film that I was like, really wanting people to discover because nobody was really talking about the film. And here I am, one of the few people on YouTube, other than some of my friends, talking about the movie. I know there's a review of the film by Allison from Movie Nights, Obscurus Lupa, and it's a decent review and everything, but she tends to review a lot of films that she considers to be corny or campy or so bad it's good or so on and so forth. And I don't really feel The Ambulance to be that in that particular category. That's me personally. I think it's a legitimately good movie. I don't think it's one of those like, oh, it's so bad it's good. No, I think it's legitimately a good movie, especially for the type of movie that it is. It's a really excellent thriller. It's not an excellent horror film. If you're expecting a really effective, scary horror movie, you're not going to get that with The Ambulance. And if I had any issues with the film that hold it back just a little bit, it would be the fact that I do feel that it really could have benefited from some more horror, from some more serious, really striking or intense horror. I definitely feel that would have really gave the film the extra push that it needed to really reach the highest peak that it could possibly reach. But that being said, I'm still really happy with the film. Now, The Ambulance is written and directed by Larry Cohen, and it is the last film that he wrote and directed, to me personally, that is legitimately a great film. He did some stuff later, but I didn't really feel that they were that great. And that's why I feel strongly that The Ambulance is his swan song when it comes to his writing and directing. Now, he did go on to write other films like Cellular and Phone Booth, but The Ambulance is the last great Larry Cohen film where he's the one that's responsible for the majority of the production. His hands are all over the direction and the production process and the writing. And it really was a great way, a great send off to such a great writer and a great filmmaker. Now, it features Eric Roberts as Josh Baker. You also have James Earl Jones, who plays Lieutenant Frank Spencer, Megan Gallagher, who plays Officer Sandra Malloy, Red Buttons as this old reporter, Elias Zachariah, Janine Turner from Cliffhanger as Cheryl Turner, and Eric Braeden from the soap opera The Young and the Restless as the main villain of the piece, this psychotic doctor who we don't even really know what his name is. He's just called the Doctor. Now, the concept of the film is another high concept idea by Larry. He came up with the idea based upon the same thought process that he had for a lot of his other earlier films. So, in a lot of his other earlier films, he takes very benign and harmless concepts and ideas or things, and he puts a horrific twist on them. He did that with It's Alive with babies, and he did that again in The Stuff with junk food. So he had this idea of doing that with ambulances, because no one thinks about an ambulance in a horror way or or with any sort of negative connotation. When people think of ambulances, they think of them as vehicles of mercy. And he wanted to turn that completely on its head and turn the ambulance, a symbol of hope, into a symbol of death and horror. And that alone is such a great, unique concept. And that's something that he was just so good at. And I've said this many times already, but it bears repeating. These high concept ideas that filmmakers and writers like Larry Cohen came up with almost on a daily basis really are something that Hollywood, especially in the mainstream, needs a whole lot more of. Because there's so much more cookie cutter, generic plot lines and generic, forgettable, fast food type movies that are being released today than ever before, especially when it comes to wide releases. And that's why, in order to really get people salivating for films again and really sinking their teeth into something that is unique, we really need more films like this. We need to have less studios saying no to projects with high concept ideas because they're afraid of them bombing. Because that's ultimately what it is. They're saying no because they don't want to take the risk, because they are looking at things from a business perspective and not from a filmmaking perspective or a storytelling perspective. They're looking at it from strictly a business perspective. And that's a serious, crippling flaw in the film industry today. Now, The Ambulance, I know why it didn't do that well, because it wasn't marketed that well. If you look at the original poster for the film, it looks like a generic, forgettable direct-to-video movie, and the movie isn't anywhere near as lame as that poster is. And I had the same artwork for the VHS. Now, the overseas cover art is actually really good, and I think the film would probably do better if it had cover art that was closer to that versus this early 90s lazy Photoshop poster that they went with, which really makes it look like some really shitty TV movie. And it's not a really shitty TV movie. Although at times, because of its low production quality and because of its low budget, it does look like it might have been like a made-for-cable film. But that doesn't mean that it does not have a whole ton of merits, because it has a lot of them. Now, another thing I want to mention when it comes to Larry Cohen's script, other than the overall concept of the film, is just how wonderfully witty it is, especially with the lines by Elias Zachariah, played by Red Buttons. Red Buttons in this is an absolute riot. So many quotable fun lines. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but if I watch the film more, I would definitely be using these quotes. He's just a very fun character, and definitely unique in a lot of ways because you don't see an older man, a really elderly man, act the way he does in this movie, and also form a bond with a younger male lead. You don't see that very often, and that creates a very fun dynamic that makes this film stand out. And another thing that really helps this film stand out, other than the initial concept and the dynamic between Eric Roberts and Red Buttons, is the overall arching plot line and how it starts. Josh is infatuated with this woman named Cheryl. He does not know her personally. He just sees her on the streets of New York City, and he just becomes infatuated with her. He becomes deeply attracted to her. So he goes up to her and starts hitting on her. And nowadays, this would not go over well. The Me Too movement would be absolutely skewering this movie and calling this character offensive and misogynistic and so on and so forth. But I see why they would do that, and I can see why some people might have an issue with this guy, but he does it in a way that comes across as fairly innocent to me. It doesn't seem like he's doing it in a devious way, and ultimately it's him who saves her because because of this obsession that he has with her. She faints in the street, she gets taken by an ambulance, and then she disappears. And Josh is the only one that's willing to try to go deep and try to solve this mystery and try to find her. And that's where he figures out what's going on with this ambulance that's going around picking people up and taking them away. And of course, a lot of people just think he's nuts, but he's still plowing through and still risking life and limb to find this woman. And ultimately, things could have ended completely in a very cliched way, but they don't. Another thing that really makes this film stand out, another thing that really puts this film quite high on my list when it comes to my personal favorite films of Larry Cohen's filmography, is the fact that he doesn't get the girl. It's revealed that she already has a boyfriend. So Josh goes through all this trouble, risks life and limb. He goes down a busy New York street on a gurney at high speed, all for this woman that he's hoping he will be able to get her to fall in love with him and they can form a relationship with one another, and she's already taken. I mean, you don't see that kind of stuff. You really don't. So that's just one thing out of many things about this movie that just really make it such a fun and unique little film. And I say little not in the means that it's just a little film in terms of its overall impact. To me, it has a really big impact because of all these things. But it is definitely a little film. It didn't really get a theatrical release, and it was made for a pretty low budget. And like with most Larry Cohen films, he really does squeeze the most he possibly can out of this budget. The ambulance, the titular ambulance in the film, has a very unique look to it. It's an older ambulance. It's the type of model of ambulance that you don't see very often, that would have been retired by this point, that has kind of a sinister look to it. And there are a lot of really good stunt work in this that is quite surprising. And some nice bits of pyrotechnics and car chases and stuff like that. So, for a small film, it definitely does pack quite a punch. And the cast is they all do really awesome jobs. I mean, Eric Roberts, he plays Josh Baker. Originally, Larry Cohen wanted Jim Carrey or John Travolta. The producers declined both. They declined Jim because he was an unknown at the time. I can't really see Jim Carrey in this role. So I'm glad he went with Eric Roberts, because ultimately this is one of his best roles. And definitely, I would say my favorite role of Eric Roberts' career. And, excuse me, for my raw voice, because, I don't know, I've been dealing with a little bit of a sore throat lately. Which probably not helping things by talking so much, but you know, got to do what you got to do. So definitely don't think Jim Carrey would have worked in this role, because this role is more of like a physical guy. He's got a physical presence to him. Jim Carrey wouldn't have had any of that. John Travolta, I think, could have worked, but I think he was out of the price range. So I don't think he was a realistic guy to do it. Even though he was in the middle of a little bit of a mini comeback after Look Who's Talking, he still ultimately was not a guy that I think they would have been able to afford for this type of low production. And maybe they might have been able to, but the producers just felt he wasn't right for the role for whatever reason. But I think John could have worked. But in the end, Eric Roberts was cast, and I'm glad he was. I like the character of Josh. Another thing that's unique about him is he's a Marvel Comics artist. Yeah, he works at Marvel Comics, and you actually get to see Stan Lee in a cameo. Long before the MCU, there was the ambulance. And it's actually shot in the actual Marvel Comics headquarters at the time in the early 90s. So I think that's a really fun aspect to this movie, is that he's a Marvel Comics artist. And even characters like James Earl Jones's character, Lieutenant Frank Spencer. It's a great role. It's a small role, but James Earl Jones really does really does chew on it quite a bit. And no pun intended, because his character loves to chew gum, and he really does he gets a big bite out of the film with his performance here. This character, it's a flawed police officer. He actually tried to commit suicide at one point. He's in some ways a little bit disgraced, and that is something that really does add more layers to that type of supporting role that ultimately makes this film even sweeter, because you have, a character like this detective who, like this Lieutenant Frank Spencer, who there's more to him than just your typical police officer in a movie. Megan Gallagher, who plays Officer Sandra Malloy, I loved her in this. I thought she was sexy, but at the same time really efficient and effective when it comes to her role as a police officer. And it was really nice to see her as the ultimate love interest for Josh, because it seemed like there was this whole will they won't they sort of thing, and the fact that they ended up getting together in the end actually worked out better. They were a better match for one another. I will say this though, I wish he did get to do a little bit more in the end of the movie. That's one tiny thing that I have a problem with when it comes to this movie. There's a running gag where it's like, oh, have you been able to shoot anybody yet? And she's all like, I'm waiting for the chance to be able to do it. And I don't think she ever actually shoots someone. I don't think she ever gets the opportunity to actually shoot anybody in the movie. She fires some shots in the club to get the club goers to run out of the place, but I don't think she actually shoots anyone. I could be wrong, but if she did, it didn't leave that much of an impact, and I think that's a mistake. I think she should have had like a grand moment where she uses her gun and takes some guy out or something. Red Buttons is just a treasure in this. This cranky old reporter who just has just hilarious, witty lines, and just is a lot of fun. And thankfully, he survives. I thought he was gonna die because that's usually what a lot of movies like this do, but no, he lived, which is a very welcome surprise. Janine Turner as Cheryl, she's drop dead gorgeous in this. Probably the hottest that I've ever seen this particular actress on screen. And ultimately, she's taken. But it just shows you how good of a guy Josh really is. Like, he goes through all this effort, realizes that she's taken, and instead of getting mad at her, he just says fuck that guy and goes on with his life. Hey, that's a pretty good guy right there, because he doesn't really harbor any ill will towards her or anything like that. I think she should have told him like early on that she was taken before he went through all of this. But then again, you wouldn't have a movie. So, uh, you know, I'm fine that ultimately was not revealed until later. Eric Braeden as the doctor, he was okay. This is a guy who's more well known for being in soap operas like Young and the Restless, and I don't know. He came across as a poor man's Timothy Dalton to me. Timothy Dalton was in this role as this character would have been infinitely times better, way better. Apparently, there was a different guy who played this character, a different actor, and Larry Cohen didn't like him. It was originally played by this actor named Wesley Addy, who was in Network. He was in The Verdict. Yeah, it seems like he really had never really played roles like that before. So he was originally the Doctor, but Cohen was unhappy with the role, so he recast him with Eric Braeden. And yeah, I mean Eric Braeden probably was better, but I don't know. Just Eric Braeden just didn't really leave that much of an impression on me. Maybe he should have just stick to soap operas. Uh, but then again, the character of the Doctor doesn't have that much development either. So I don't know if it's Eric Braeden's fault or the scripts. That's one other aspect of the film that I think could have been fleshed out more is this Doctor character. You really don't get to know that much about him. You really don't get that much uh, of a gist of who he is and what he's about. Kind of seems like he's trying to do the right thing, but in the wrong way. Like Gene Hackman's character in Extreme Measures, which is another really underrated medical thriller. But it's nowhere near as effective as that performance, as Gene Hackman's performance. So definitely feel that could have used a little more work. And there are some other members. There are some other cast members in the film, but no one else that really gets extensive screen time as the ones that I mentioned. The film has a score by Jay Chataway that I think it's there. I don't think it's amazing, but it's a solid, it's a decent enough score. And the cinematography with Jax Hotkin I thought was quite good, especially the shots where the film really did a great job using lighting to make a lot of sequences feel very surreal and weird, especially the green lighting that apparently was the lights that were used in the back of the old ambulance. So they used that type of lighting throughout the majority of the movie, which I thought was a very inspired choice. It really made a lot of scenes pretty eerie when it comes to the cinematography. The editing by Claudia Finkel and Armand Leibowitz, it's quite excellent as well. There really aren't any moments in this film where I felt like the editing was a problem. Goes by at a really quick pace. I would say it's a breeze. It's like 90 something minutes. It rarely ever drags and builds up to a quite explosive climax. No pun intended. And there are other moments in it that are really tense, like Eric Roberts going down the street on a gurney, the chase of the ambulance at the end that ends in an explosion, other little bits here and there. And it's one of those movies that the idea is very strong, and that alone really keeps you invested in the film, and the characters are likable enough that you're also invested in the movie in that way. I think the villain could have been fleshed out more, and I think that would have made the film stronger. I also feel that the horror elements of the film could have been pumped up. I would have liked to have seen a little bit of blood, a little bit of gore. Uh, and I know that's not the type of movie it is, but I think that would have helped the movie a little bit. And I also would have liked to have seen a climax that maybe took place at one of these black markets, medical facilities. And it's what happens is you find where the doctor is keeping his patients, and they're in this upstairs part of this apartment complex or abandoned building or something. It's I think it's an upstairs part of a club, but there's all this talk about people getting sent and sold to the black market, and I really feel the film would have benefited a lot from you actually seeing that. Like seeing the medical black market, seeing what kinds of horrific experiments are being done and what the results are, and so on and so forth. I definitely feel the film would have had more impact and would have been a stronger film if it had that in there. Now, saying that it could have had more impact is not saying that it didn't have impact at all. I feel that it still had a lot of impact. Like I said, it still packs quite a punch, but I feel it could have really resonated even deeper if it had some scenes like that in the movie. Those are really the only problems I have with it. It could have pumped up the horror a little bit more. Could have had the main villain of the Doctor have some more scenes to flesh him out better, and maybe have a different actor, and have the lead girl, the police officer, actually have a bigger moment near the end. But that being said, I still feel The Ambulance is an amazing film for the most part. I know I said that early on, but I definitely do agree with that. I think it's a really amazing, quite awesome movie that I think more people should be talking about, and I definitely do recommend it. So if I were to rate it out of 5 stars, I would give The Ambulance 4.5 out of 5. Anyway, thank you for watching my review of The Ambulance, and as always, I will see you later. See ya.